Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. So this is a first of the online talk on what we had launched as Jnanamrita Manthana, a series of special lectures as a part of our celebration of 75 years of India's independence. And I'm very happy that a distinguished crystallographer, Professor M.R.N. Murthy, is inaugurating this series today. That is, his is the first talk. So I welcome Professor Murthy, all my colleagues who have joined here, students and participants from other institutions who are eagerly waiting to listen to Professor Murthy's talk, Shining Light on Crystals. So it is my pleasure that I introduce Professor Murthy today. Professor Murthy is a renowned crystallographer. Most of you know about him. Any Google search will show his different credentials. He had completed his MSc degree in physics from IIT Madras and subsequently did his PhD in crystallography under the guidance of Professor K. Venkatesan at the Indian Institute of Science. And he did his postdoctoral work with one of the pioneers of structural biology, Professor M.G. Roseman of Purdue University, Indiana, USA. He then joined as a faculty at Molecular Biophysics Unit of Indian Institute of Science, where he served until his retirement. And he holds the Distinguished Professor and AstraZeneca Chair at the Institute of Bioinformatics and Applied Biotechnology, IBAB. And Professor Murthy was one of the key persons in developing crystallography in India. So for a long time, he was the only crystallographer working on viral proteins in India. So he is fondly called as Virus Murthy. Many people know him as Virus Murthy. So he has contributed about 100 protein crystal structures to the Protein Data Bank and has authored as many papers in internationally peer-reviewed journals. And he is very enthusiastic in giving lectures to addressing students and interacting with people. And his enthusiasm is like a virus, it spreads. So we want to get infected by your enthusiasm, sir. So he has received more than a dozen awards, including the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award for his various achievements. When my colleague, Professor M.K. Kokila, thank you, madam.
Thank you.
So she invited him to deliver an online talk in the Department of Physics, Bangalore University. He readily agreed. There was no saying no. And he also told me that it looks like I have a previous Janma association with Central College, Bangalore, and hence with Bangalore University is what he told. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation. And we are privileged to attend your lecture today. I leave the stage to you now. And thank you all for joining this program. Sir, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Usha. And I also thank Kokila, Usha, and other faculty members for inviting me to this talk. This is really a pleasure. You see, I joined Central College, so-called Bangalore University Central College, 54 years ago. And I left 51 years ago. So, you see, but still it is my department. You know, I feel very proud to be a part of physics department. What I note with very great satisfaction is that, you know, it is just generally said that the amount of sulfuric acid that is consumed in a country is an index of its industrial progress. You know, industrialized countries utilize more sulfuric acid because it's such a fundamental substance required for so many factories. In my opinion, the number of ladies occupying positions of eminence are, you know, where like professors and university teachers is an index of our progress in culture. If the country is cultured and civilized, then you will find more ladies. When I was in physics department, there were no ladies in either physics or mathematics. Now I see that there are quite a few that is a very nice, very satisfying thing that tells me that the younger generation is much better in terms of culture than our generation. And I hope the trend will continue and women will actually play their part, which is half of the society. Well, with that small note, you see, which is I am very passionate about it. Women should become as powerful as men, not more powerful, but equal. But anyway, here my talk concerns two topics, light and crystals. I will tell a little bit about light and a little bit about crystals. It will be a mixture of two. I may go from one side to the other. 125 years ago, Ranjan was a physicist. His lab here, his lab you see on the top side here, was worse than the lab, Central College lab, when I was working there. Now, of course, I am sure Central College lab would be much better organized. But what he was trying to do, it was known at the time that if you have an evacuated chamber, what is shown in the left-hand side, evacuated chamber means air at very low pressure. You cannot actually take out all the air in a tube. And then put an anode and a cathode, a very high electrical pressure between anode and cathode, you will produce X-rays. This is very well known now. Yes.
Sir?
Yes.
Please, will you make it full screen? That is, will you start the slideshow? That is on the right, your slides above there. If you start slideshow, it would be.
It should be all right now.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Yeah. You see, essentially, we know today, when Ranjan did this work, discovery of electrons was 10 years ahead. So we now know that if you heat a tungsten cathode, it ejects electrons and the voltage, positive voltage accelerates them. When they hit the copper anode, you will get X-rays. But X-rays later were realized as very short electromagnetic radiation. In fact, actually, he asked his wife to put her finger in the path of X-rays and photographed it. And you can see the ring finger of Lady Ranjan, a ring that has been seen by more eyes than any other ring, marriage ring in the world. So he also realized that whatever rays are coming penetrate the muscles much better than bones. So actually, if there's a fractured bone, it could be discovered with X-rays. Why is there a noise? Do you also hear the noise? I think everybody should switch off their microphone. There was too much noise. Now it is reduced. I hope.
I have muted. I have muted.
Yeah. Okay. Now it's all right. Let us continue. Well, the other part is crystals. Crystals are beautiful. Whatever crystal you see, very soon our planetarium will have a crystal park. In the outside the planetarium, there will be a park where they will have lots of big crystals. You can go and touch them. They are absolutely beautiful. Of course, crystals are also something that feeds to our vanity. If you possess a large diamond, of course, you can ignore all the others and treat them as inferior. So crystals are both a symbol of beauty and vanity. But actually, very few of us realize that this science of crystals was known in India for a long time. I see there are two kinds of people. People who claim that all science was in India. If you go to Vedas, you will find all science. That's an absolute nonsense, and it's an ego. There is no mention of atoms, molecules, or Dalton's laws in Vedas. You won't find them. Atomic energy. These are all developments of modern science. There is, of course, Indians they have had produced good science and mathematics, and if we know what they had produced, we can be proud of them in the true sense of the word. False sense of pride is no good. Anyway, I want to stress that crystals were something with which Indians were very familiar. And the science of crystal, or crystallography as we call it, in ancient India, it was called Ratna Shastra. Just to tell you that they were actually quite familiar and they had thought deeply over crystals, I have a quote from very ancient texts. These are about 1,500-year-old texts. The first of these verses tell you that due to Earth's nature, various forms of gems are formed over long incubation periods. This we know very well. You see, diamond is formed because of the high pressure of Earth. When organic matter converted to carbon gets stuck in the Earth's interior. Actually, because of the presence of gems in the bosom of Earth was named as Ratna Garbha. Garbha means one which carries it in its bosom. So Ratna Garbha is the Earth's name. And you know, we also had classified precious stones into so-called Maharatnas and Uparatnas. Today we call them precious stones and semi-precious stones. I think somebody should switch off their microphone. You know, if anybody switch on microphone, there will be noise. Anyway,
Sorry, I muted her, Anjali.
Yeah, that's okay. If everybody has switched off, it won't be any noise. Anyway, we have classified. This classification still holds. You know, you have to pay more if you want to buy a precious stone compared to a semi-precious stone. And their endurance, their beauty also depends on whether it's a precious stone or a semi-precious stone. So it is not actually outdated. That concept is not outdated. And people valued precious stones so much. You know, you have a whole sort of precious stones here. Somebody who is possessed of all great qualities, they could be named Navratna. Now, of course, mean 9. 9, he has the quality of 9 pearls. That's the highest adjective you can use. Although Navratna is not very common in Karnataka, it is there in India. In fact, Navaratna Rama Rao was a great Kannada writer. So Navaratna is something we are proud to name our children. Also, actually, if you are from a traditional family, you know, before constructing the house, they will put Navaratna. Of course, Navaratna can be bought in the shop. These are extremely small stones for a very small price. But they will put it under the ground, and on the top of that, they construct a house. Now, actually, there was so much scientific understanding of precious stones. This verse tells you the diamond crystals have 6 vertices and 8 facets. In fact, actually, a solid object with 6 vertices and 8 triangular facets is what today's language we call octahedral symmetry. You know, the diamond has octahedral symmetry. And it actually, this poem, these 5 properties of diamonds. Diamond was so hard that we call people who are very strong, you know, very unconquerable body as Vajrakaya. You know, Vajrakaya. Bhimasena is referred to as Vajrakaya. And then this last one I want to show you. Of all the gems on earth and all materials made of metals, the hardest is the diamond. You know, this is still true today, although this knowledge is thousands of years old. You cannot scratch diamond with any other material, but diamond can scratch any other material. You know, if you go to a glass cutter, he will cut glass with a diamond tip. So diamond has so special properties. Crystals have very special properties. In fact, crystals also have their own characteristic colors. Because of that, our ancients associated different celestial objects with different crystals. For example, sun is ruby, ruby is red, Venus is white, diamond, Venus was associated with diamond, Mars with coral, And these actually make sense. You know, if you look at these celestial objects, you are reminded of, or if your imagination is as ripe as our ancients, you are reminded of these precious stones. So that way, you know, crystals were loved in India and people used to it. And then we also realized that symmetry is something which we can use, exploit in art forms. You know, this is Shiva. The word Shiva means peace. Shivam Vastu means let there be peace in your house. When you want to represent peace, you make a face very symmetrical. You know, this face is extremely symmetrical. You see Gautama Buddha anywhere, his face is extremely symmetrical, whereas asymmetry represents dynamism. So actually, if you see Nataraja or Rudra, you know, he does a cosmic dance and he actually is dancing on a demon. That represents motion, energy. So you see symmetry and asymmetry also entered into art form. Of course, it is not only in India that such a thing happened. See, Islam, because they are so opposed to idol worship, in mosques, they cannot have any idol. Even a picture of an animal is forbidden. They cannot have. But they do want to decorate their mosques. How do you decorate it if you cannot have an idol? You know, you can, a doll, beautiful doll, or whatever you can put. But if you are forbidden by using any representation of human or animal form, you have to recourse to other art forms. And in Islam, they developed extremely wonderful art forms. You will see this kind of art if you particularly go to Iran, and in the mosque there you will find there is also a similar, not as beautiful, but similar artwork in the Hazrat Bal Mosque in Srinagar. See, this, there is some principle here which you can notice. This picture has fourfold symmetry. See, if you actually sit on the center of this square pattern, you know, whether you say you look at east, west, north, south, it will all look identical. So it has fourfold axis of symmetry, we say, in the language of crystallography today. But you see, this is a fourfold, this is a fourfold, this is a fourfold. The four folds are repeated periodically. You know, the distance between one fourfold and another twofold is exactly same as the twofold and the consecutive twofold. Like that, in two different directions, the four folds are identical. And also, you see, if you draw a line through these four folds and draw a line through these four folds, the two lines will be exactly perpendicular. See, these are things that we prove in crystallography. But without proof, without actually modern knowledge of crystallography, the artist could draw this picture. But you see, now notice that if you take the center of these four folds, this point also is a fourfold, which means if you have four folds which are periodically repeated, midway between these four folds, there will be a fourfold of a different kind. It's not the same kind. You see, this fourfold is very different from this fourfold. And between these two fourfolds, exactly at the center, there's a twofold axis. See, there are some principles of crystallography which becomes very obvious in Islamic art. And this is another of the Islamic art. And you can easily see that it has sixfold axis of symmetry. You know, these six are sixfold. This is also sixfold. You see everywhere. And six folds actually repeat at exactly the same intervals. That means there are periodic arrangement of sixfold axis. And if you take three sixfold axes, you know, the three consecutive sixfold axes, exactly in between, you have a threefold axis. See, exactly in between fourfold axis, you had a different kind of fourfold. But exactly in between three sixfold axis, you have a different kind of threefold axis. But exactly midway between sixfold you also will have a two-fold axis. Just like in four-fold, there's a two-fold axis here. So actually many principles of crystallography are obviously present in Islamic art. Then recently, Penrose got Nobel Prize for his work in high energy physics. And he drew some pictures called Penrose tiles. You know, these are beautiful pictures. You see, he wanted to create a figure with five-fold. See, there is a five-fold axis here. You can see five-fold is surrounded by these five, that is surrounded by these five. Okay, that is some kind of five-fold. But actually, you see, the five-folds are not in a line at all. They are not repeated. You see, this distance is very large compared to this distance. So there is no periodic arrangement. If you have periodic arrangement, five-fold is not possible at all. Actually, even here, there is only a one five-fold at the very center. You know, this is not a five-fold because in the very close vicinity, there is five-fold. But if you go further away, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, there is nothing here. It should have been another star here. So there is actually no five-fold. So five-fold symmetry is not at all possible if you want to have a periodic arrangement of materials. So this is a rule that we can learn from actually these artistic diagrams. In fact, you will see many of these features in our Rangoli pattern. You know, when people put Rangoli pattern, if you have learned crystallography, the way you look at Rangoli is going to be different. You always look for symmetry. All right. See, why is it all these things happen? Were not known for a long time. But in the previous, not previous, no, I have to say previous to previous. In the 19th century, not 20th century, mathematicians posed themselves a problem. If you know, there was an idea that crystals have those wonderful properties because in a crystal, molecules are arranged periodically. That means you see this ghost face, they are all at the same distance. And again, in this way also they are at the same distance. In fact, it doesn't matter which direction you take. If you take this ghost, that goes, they will be periodic again. So in every possible direction, you join any two ghost faces, that will be periodic. So there will be three-dimensional periodicity in the molecules that constitute the crystal. This was the concept. Whether it is true or not, nobody knew because no crystal structure was known. Assuming this, then you can, if you are a mathematician, you can ask a question. In how many ways can I organize periodically objects in space? Can you arrange in an infinite ways or is it going to be limited? This is the question. And this question was answered in the 19th century, much before either X-ray diffraction or whatever, X-ray crystallography or any experimental evidence was gathered to really know that there are only limited ways of organizing molecules with periodicity. But it's really amazing, you know, how mathematicians can see the truth before experimental evidence. Pure logic, you know, the power of pure logic. They worked out how many ways you can do. Well, you see, actually some of the ways are illustrated here. See, this is a four-fold symmetric arrangement. This is a six-fold symmetric arrangement. Like that, you can make a two-fold symmetric, one-fold symmetric, three-fold symmetric. How many different arrangements here can you make? They found the answer to this. You see, unfortunately, it needs a course on crystallography to cover it completely. But what mathematicians realized that there are 230 different ways in which you can organize molecules in space. Only 230, no more, you know. And these 230, they called as space groups. How can you actually organize objects in three-dimensional space? Only 230 distinct ways. And these 230 can be sub-classified based on some of the common properties they share to 32 point groups or 11 Lave groups, 14 Bravais lattices, and 7 crystal systems. We don't have to worry at that moment, at this moment, what exactly these mean. All that I want you to note is that there are limited number of ways in which molecules can be organized in space. So if you take a crystal, molecules are organized with periodicity. And which of the 230 patterns of arrangement does my crystal conform to? And because it has that kind of symmetrical arrangement, what can I conclude about the symmetry? For example, you see in physics you learn thermal expansion or Young's modulus. The Young's modulus is a tensor. If you press along x-axis, it will shrink along x-axis, but it may expand along y and z-axis. So you see, if you want to relate all these, you need 9 constants. But anyway, those 9 constants, how many unique constants a crystal has depends on the crystal system. So this can be related to a lot of physics of crystals. Well, you see, when Ranjan discovered X-rays, it was hypothesized, not proved, hypothesized that X-rays are light of very short wavelength. They are just like visible light, red, blue, yellow, orange, except that wavelength is so small that human eye cannot really respond to that. So X-rays were thought to be short electromagnetic radiation, but there was no proof. And crystals were thought to be periodic arrangement of molecules, but there was no proof. Then in 1914, a great man called Lave, he had a very brilliant idea. If X-rays are short electromagnetic radiation and crystals are packing of molecules with distances between molecules of the order of the wavelength of X-rays, then if you shoot X-rays to crystals, they will scatter X-rays in very specific directions, not all directions. You see, if our body scatters light, light is scattered in every possible direction. So whether a man is standing in front of me or towards my side or behind me, all of them will be able to see me because light scattered from my body has entered their eyes. Of course, if it doesn't enter their eyes, they won't be able to see me. So the fact that we can see a person from all possible directions, if nothing is obstructing our view, shows that our body scatters light in every possible direction. Lave's idea was that crystals will not do that. If you shine X-rays on crystals, it will scatter only in specific directions. That was immediately, his students took an X-ray picture of a crystal, and you see there are spots here. These are the directions in which the crystal has scattered X-rays. But there are many places where there are no spots. These are the directions in which the crystal has not scattered X-rays. So actually his idea was proved almost immediately by his own students, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1914. And then, why does it happen? Why does crystal scatter in some directions, not in all other directions? As physics students, it would be very easy for you to understand. Let us say if 2 waves are coming and they meet at a detector, whatever detector you have, proportional counter or whatever, photographic plate, you have a detector for electromagnetic radiation. If 2 waves come and meet at the detector, the waves can be in phase, which means the time at which their crest is formed at any given place is coincident. The crests are, they are in phase, we can say. The 2 waves are in phase. Then the resulting wave will actually have a very large amplitude. The amplitude becomes double. Whatever is the amplitude here, they are perfectly in phase, the amplitude becomes double. But if 2 waves meet at the detector such that the crest of one falls on the trough of another. See, crest means it is actually pulling the medium. See, wave is actually a motion in the medium. It is pulling the medium this way. and this wave is pulling the medium down. Of course, if it is an electromagnetic radiation, you know that there is no medium, but there is an electric vector. The electric vector will be up here, electric vector will be down here. You add the electric vector, they will add to 0. So actually there won't be any wave at all. This wave plus this wave is 0 wave. 1 plus 1 is 0. Here 1 plus 1 is 2. But here, see, they are neither in phase nor out of phase, but they are slightly out of phase. Now you see actually these two add up to an intermediate wave. This wave addition is what we physicists know very well. If you want to represent it in a mathematical form, you have to express waves either as complex numbers. See, addition of complex numbers follows the same rule. Or you have to express it as exponents of complex numbers. Either way, this can be very accurately mathematically represented. So you can work out the addition of waves. In a crystal, what happens is that different unit cells scatter. Because unit cells are periodic, there will be constant difference between phases scattered by one unit cell and phase of wave scattered from the subsequent unit cell. If those phases are in, if those waves are in phase, they add up to a large value. If they are not in phase, they cancel each other. In fact, in a whole lot of directions, the waves will not be in phase. So they just destroy each other. Only in specific directions, they will be in phase. There they will scatter X-rays maximally. That means this phenomena we call diffraction. So Lave proposed that crystals should diffract X-rays. See, this won't happen if you shine light on crystals. Light will be scattered by crystals. You know, that's why diamond looks so nice. But diamond should diffract X-rays. That's the Lave's idea, which means diamond will scatter light in some specific directions. How do we mathematically describe? There are three methods in which we can actually mathematically describe. Lave himself wrote three equations. See, A dot S equals H, B dot S equals K, C dot S equals L, three dot products. See, these three lines won him Nobel Prize. You know, it's amazing what just three lines can get you a Nobel Prize. But of course, you see, the intuition and brightness behind these three lines is amazing. I'm not going to explain to you what it means. It tells you the direction, it gives you the direction in which X-ray beams add up in phase. Then this was very difficult to use in practice. Then a young man of 24 actually formulated the same three equations in an alternative form, which actually was much easier to use. That is called Bragg's law. This you would have studied 2d sin theta equals lambda. Although you have studied, I think the full meaning of it, sometimes, you know, you have a superficial meaning. If you spend some time, you will know how beautiful this concept is. But let's not worry about those concepts. Then after this was in 1914, and about 1919 or so, there was another great man called Ewald, and he made something very remarkable. I am sure as physicists you would have heard of, if you have a lattice, you can construct a reciprocal lattice. See, if the lattice, the measurements are in centimeters, the reciprocal lattice, the measurements will be in inverse centimeters. Of course, here in crystal, with respect to crystals, we measure distances in angstrom unit because they are very small. So the reciprocal space will be in inverse angstrom units. So for every cell, he constructed a reciprocal cell. Then every reflection that comes because of one of these reciprocal lattice points. See, you see, actually, if you go here, you will see the concept of lattice. See, these ghosts are there. Let us put a dot at the head of the ghost. If you put a dot at the head of this ghost, you have to put a dot at the head of the ghost. You have to put a dot at the head of every ghost. Then you take away all the ghosts. You are only left with dots. Now you make these dots smaller and smaller in diameter. You know, dots become smaller and smaller. Then they become infinitesimally small, but still they are there. And you say you can conceive of it. then you have a lattice. So a lattice is infinitely thin points repeated in three-dimensional space. Same way, instead of that direct lattice, Ewald constructed a reciprocal lattice. This reciprocal lattice is rigidly attached to the direct lattice. If you rotate the direct lattice, the reciprocal lattice also rotates. Then if the X-ray beam is coming like this, Ewald constructed a sphere of radius equal. This is a sphere in reciprocal space. You see, reciprocal space, everything is measured in inverse Armstrong. So this radius, this circle has a radius which can be specified in inverse Armstrong. Of course, it is 1 over lambda. 1 over lambda. Lambda is in Armstrong wavelength. 1 over lambda is inverse Armstrong. So he constructed a sphere. Then he proposed that any reciprocal lattice point, which is derived from the direct lattice, if it touches the sphere is called Ewald sphere now, that circle of 1 over lambda radius, you will get a reflection. So you could predict reflections emanating from a crystal in a very straightforward way with Ewald's construction, which was much more difficult with Lave equations or Bragg's law. But the three formula physically mean exactly the same thing. They are not different in terms of their implication, but in terms of ease of use, it is actually much easier to use Bragg's Ewald's construction. This is what I have shown you in a little more detail. See, this lattice, there's one lattice point exactly on the Ewald sphere. Then you will have a reflection here. See, this is almost about to touch the Ewald sphere. And then you will have a reflection here. Then if this touches, you have an Ewald sphere here. How can you make different lattice points touch the Ewald sphere if you rotate the lattice? See, this point is not quite touching here. If you rotate it counterclockwise, this will come and touch here. And if you keep rotating, this will come and touch here. If you rotate it, it will come and touch here. So you can make any reciprocal lattice point touch the Ewald sphere by rotating the reciprocal lattice point. How do you rotate the reciprocal lattice point? You rotate the crystal, because whatever is the direct lattice, reciprocal lattice is hardwired, is welded to direct lattice. If you rotate direct lattice, reciprocal lattice also rotates. So that way, you can get reflections out of every reciprocal lattice point and record it on a photograph. Now I will actually show you how this recording goes. You see, the reciprocal lattice is rotating. Why this picture is not working? Uh-oh. See, you should have, I think can you see the flash of light? No. See, whenever this reciprocal lattice point touches, it should have shown. I don't know why it is not showing, but it doesn't matter. Just believe me. You see, the moment it touches, you see different reciprocal lattice points are coming and touching the Ewald sphere. Then you have a reflection, and those reflections get recorded at different points. Okay, now you see how we deal with this. It is actually a hugely complex problem, but it can be split into steps, each of which is not at all difficult. If you take a crystal has almost billions of molecules. You see, billion may look like big number, but if you take a salt crystal in your house, it will have a billion sodium chloride molecules. It's not at all surprising if it is a billion. It's so large because atoms are so small. So if you take a crystal, it has a lot of molecules which are organized periodically. And molecules have atoms. Atoms scatter X-rays. And how does atoms scatter X-rays? That can be worked out. This is a simple thing in electrodynamics. So how X-rays interact with actually what scatters X-rays are really electrons. You see, neutrons and protons do not scatter X-rays, or protons scatter X-rays, but they scatter so much. See, protons are lazy guys, not like electrons, because they're too heavy. If somebody is 500 kilogram mass, they hardly can get up on their own. They are very lazy. So in some sense, protons are lazy. So electrons are the ones which actually scatter X-rays. And we know the distribution of electron cloud. How electron cloud is distributed around the atom is given by the solution of Schrodinger's equation for that atom. The wave function, the square of the wave function, gives us the probability of finding that electron. So we can actually see how X-rays are scattered by the cloud of atom. And I am going to skip this. If an atom is at rest, it will scatter X-rays. If an atom is moving, then it will scatter X-rays in a slightly different way, because the electron cloud of that atom has expanded for a vibrating atom. So the scattering gets affected. All that can be worked out. So in the final analysis, we will be able to get information not only about the position of the atom, but also how much atom is vibrating. Now I have just written two equations. I hope it will not actually throw you off my presentation. See, if you call F as the scattering by the atom, then you see one atom will scatter as much as F. It is a jth atom. So if it is if it is an oxygen atom, it will scatter some amount. But if it is a mercury atom, it will scatter much more because there are more electrons in mercury. So Fj is how much an atom scatters. And this expression, I told you, waves have phases. And that phases, you cannot add waves just like amplitude 1 plus amplitude 2 plus amplitude 3. I have already shown that if they are out of phase, 1 plus 1 can actually be 0. If you want to add correctly, then you have to associate a phase factor. And although I am not going to tell you how this exponential takes care of the phase factor. This is a complex number, you see, e power 2 pi I rj dot s is a complex number. Its real part is cos 2 pi rj dot s. Its imaginary part is sin 2 pi rj dot s. So it has both imaginary and real parts. And if you add these numbers for each atom, you will get the total scattering by a unit cell. If you actually add over the unit cell. So if you write Fs is equal to J equals 1 to n, where n is the number of atoms in the unit cell. And this is the scattering by one atom along with the phase of the wave with which the atom has, the scattering from the atom has to be associated. This will give us the total scattering by the unit cell. We can show that the total scattering by the crystal is proportional to the scattering by a single unit cell magnified by the number of unit cells. So you see what happens if you use a crystal. See, if you use one molecule, how much X-ray scatters? Very little. It won't be detectable by any detector in the universe. But if you have a crystal, there are thousands of unit cells. All of them will scatter. So the scattering becomes magnified by the number of unit cells. But still, what the scattering is by a unit cell. We are going to record scattering by a unit cell. But our signal strength has gone up. So it is possible to record. This is the advantage why you must have crystals for this. And you see, without going into the detail, I will present to you two very fundamental equations that crystallographers use. If you know the electron density distribution, rho is electron density, throughout our unit cell. Of course, electron density is non-zero when it is close, when the point is close to the nucleus of an atom. If there is a point in the unit cell which is not close to the nucleus of any atom, the electron density at that point will be nearly zero. So you see, in the unit cell, the electrons are, see, electron in physics are thought of as a cloud, not as a particle. You know, that's not a good picture. See, you know, that's why we don't call the path electron takes around the nucleus, we don't call it an orbit, we call it an orbital. And we represent the cloud of electrons around the nucleus. So electron density is really a cloud. How is this cloud distributed in the unit cell? If you actually do this, see, this is how much an electron, piece of electron density scatter X-rays. And this is the phase factor associated with that scattering. And then you integrate it over the entire unit cell, you will get total scattering by the unit cell. If you have recorded all these, then you can actually do another inverse transform of this. If you call this Fourier transform, you can actually call this inverse Fourier transform. Then that will give us the electron density. And that electron density will be our structure. So if you want to determine structure by crystallography, first record all F, which are the amplitudes of reflections. These are the amplitudes of Bragg reflections. And then you have to do the Fourier transform. But every reflection has a phase. And unless you know that phase, you cannot do this inverse Fourier transform. See, if you look at this inverse Fourier form, you have this F, which is related to just the intensity you recorded. And then that e power I alpha is there. This is related to the phase of that reflection. Unless you know phase and amplitude, you cannot actually calculate the electron density. The amplitude is just a simple measurement using something like a Geiger counter or whatever. It's a counting device. You know how many photons, X-ray photons, are arriving at the reflection position. But e power I alpha will be the phase factor. Well, once it was established, it was very clear that if you make X-ray measurements, you can determine perhaps crystal structures. And a very humble beginning was made by a team of father and son, Sir Lawrence Bragg and Sir William Bragg. They worked together. Of course, they worked not together. One was in Australia, another was in England. But they worked on the same problem. And they determined the structure of sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is a very simple structure. Today you study sodium chloride structure in your primary school. So it's really simple. It was actually determined in 1915. You see, 105 years ago. This was the first structure. Although they guessed this structure, they didn't have to work very hard. But how do you solve large protein structures or large structures such as those of proteins and other biomolecules, huge drugs? That was not at all easy. That took almost 50 years to develop. I will just tell you the history of how crystallography developed. Then I will tell you something very exciting, how crystallography has just become a revolution. Dorothy, she is like a great mother for all of us. She's a wonderful lady, and she is the first English lady, British lady to get Nobel Prize. Really fantastic character. She's no more now. Dorothy was a student of Bernal, J.D. Bernal. And at that time, people did not know what kind of molecules are proteins. See, one of the questions you can ask, do proteins have their own shape? Or, you see, if you take a string, see, they knew that proteins are polypeptide chains. They knew that they're polymers. Polymers are long molecules. If you take a string which is long, you can actually fold the string into different shapes. And then these strings can take different shapes. So like that, proteins may take different shapes, or they may have their own shape. But if they don't have their own shape, they don't make crystals, they cannot diffract. That was known. That was known to Bernal. So he asked Dorothy to crystallize something and take X-ray diffraction picture, which she did. And she found beautiful diffraction spots, which proved to them that proteins have their own structure. Then a young man, Max Perutz, and another, John Kendrew, wanted to join J.D. Bernal as PhD students. J.D. Bernal offered them a research position, provided they agreed to work on protein structures. They did it in 1930s, but it is only in 1960 myoglobin structure was determined by John Kendrew, and in 1962 hemoglobin structure was determined by Max Perutz. They took 30 years to determine the structure. So it was a very arduous effort, mainly because they had to find the phases. Amplitude was easy to find, straightforward, but phases of reflections had to be found in an indirect way. So it took 30 years. Then started a revolution in crystallography. First of all, see, I am sure the X-ray machine in Central College, I hope it is functional, can only generate weak X-rays because it has an anode on which electrons come and hit. And when electrons hit the anode, X-rays are produced. But if you adjust the current, you see, you keep increasing the current. Current is really the density of electrons that are hitting the anode. If you increase the current, more electrons will hit the anode. Then the anode will melt. So you cannot increase the current too much in your X-ray machine. Then people thought, we can rotate the anode. You see, this anode can be rotated very fast so that the electron gun comes and hits it at different points. Then even if you increase the current, this copper is not going to melt. Such X-ray generators were called rotating anode X-ray generators. And they produce almost 20 times the intensity of seed tube X-ray generators. So it was a big improvement. Then in the 1980s, the crazy physicists wanted to build some machines. They have built now much crazier machines. You know, that you have heard of Large Hadron Collider. But these machines built in 1980s are called synchrotrons. This is a machine. To take the picture of this machine, you have to go in a helicopter and take. There is a tunnel here inside, some mile-long tunnel, which is completely evacuated. So they inject electrons into this tunnel, and by applying force, suitable electromagnetic force, they make the electron go round and round and round their path. When electrons bend their path, we know that they emit electromagnetic radiation. Any bending charge has to emit electromagnetic radiation. This is a result of classical electrodynamics. So as electrons go round and round, they actually emit very intense radiation because these electrons are moving with almost the speed of light. So that became a source of X-rays. And that X-ray was, say, 10,000, 100,000 times more powerful than the X-ray we could actually produce in the lab. Which means that what data collection, you see, for a virus crystal in Bangalore, we had to work for 3 years to collect the data. Now, if I go to a synchrotron, I can collect the data in half an hour. So you see, there is no comparison about the time that you can save if you work with synchrotron. Then you see, some proteins are very easy to get because they are present in large quantities in liver of animals. So you can go to a butcher shop, buy goat liver or sheep liver or bovine liver, and then you can extract your protein out of it. But this cannot be done if you want to work on a protein encoded by coronavirus, COVID-19, because the virus is never present in large quantity. It will cause death, but it is not present in large quantity. So the proteins cannot be isolated from a diseased individual. So you will have to actually pull out the gene coding for any protein you see, this may look a little bit foreign language for you if you have not studied biology. See, molecular biology is the field which allows us to manipulate genes. We can take gene from humans and transfer it to a bacteria or plant. We can take a gene from plant and transfer it to man. So you can actually stitch foreign genes. So you can take gene from, say, coronavirus and stitch it into a bacterium that grows very easily in the laboratory. And the bacterium then produces that protein. So like that, because of this technique, today we can produce any protein of our choice without actually going to the source. And then to make protein crystals, See, you have so many conditions. I don't know how many of these parameters will make sense to you. The concentration of the protein, the buffer you use, the molarity of the buffer, any additives like metal atoms or EDTA that you add in the solution, what is the protein concentration in the solution. Like that, there are many parameters on which crystallization depends. Under some condition, it crystallizes. But how do you come to that condition? You will have to search through virtually hundreds of thousands of conditions. And this used to take months of manual labor. But now people have developed the so-called robots for crystallization. You just sit at the terminal and program all the variables you want to try for crystallization. It will take solutions from different containers and mix them and get you a whole lot of conditions. It will set up, in fact, it will even look at the sets after a few days and tell you which of the wells have crystals. So you can only examine that. Then you take the crystal to the X-ray lab and hit the crystal with X-rays, you will get such diffraction pattern. See, some of the directions, these are the directions in which X-rays were not at all scattered. So this is empty. But these are the directions in which it has scattered. So each one of these reflections here corresponds to a reciprocal lattice point. You know, I told you about the construction of reciprocal lattice point. In this picture, we will have to answer 4 questions or 3 questions. You know, whenever I look at this, this is a picture recorded in Bangalore on a crystal of a Sesbania mosaic virus. It took 36 hours to record this picture. But if you go to synchrotron, you will get it in seconds. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. These are just beautiful. When you develop this picture and bring it out and look at it on a light screen, your heart jumps with joy. You know, it's really fantastic that these patterns are produced by crystals. Actually, I want to ask, if you take any one spot, where do you come from? Which means, which reciprocal lattice do you represent? How strong are you? How intense it is? You see, this is intense, but you can see this is central one is intense. By side, it is weak. Next to that is very weak. This is almost vanishingly weak. So there are strong spots and weak spots. How strong are you? I have to ask. And how much do I trust you? Which means when I measure, what error I have made. See, error is very important in science. You not only make a measurement, you also have an estimate of the error. This would have been impossible if you had to do manually. You know, in the around in 1990s, people developed methods where you can ask a computer to do this analysis. And that computer program works very well. That is what I have called indexing. It has looked at the photograph and it has identified all the details. It has found the address of each of these parts. It has also found out what are my crystal details, crystal parameters. Then you see a spot looks like this. If you expand a spot, let's say photograph, you expand one spot, you expand even more, it looks like this. You see that these are called pixels. See, every photograph is made up of pixels, whether you realize or not. Let's say you take a picture in your mobile. Actually different points in the mobile have different numbers that represent how intense that spot is. If it produces that kind of intensity on the screen, lo and behold, you hold your picture. Because you don't see this individually, it looks like a smooth picture. But if you expand it, you will have this. This is what we call digitized picture. And the counts here are how many X-ray photons are fallen into that spot. You can add them all up and get the intensity of the reflection. That way, we can determine the details of every reflection. Another revolution that has happened amazingly is the development in computer industry. Every 3 years, the cost of the computer has become half and the power of the computer has doubled. So you see the power has gone up and the cost has come down. So today you can have very great power. And then you see there was one more problem. When you expose crystal to X-rays, You know, X-rays are hazardous radiation. If you yourself get exposed to X-rays, it's very likely that you will develop cancer if you actually get exposed very much. Similarly, crystals, when they are exposed to X-rays, they become non-crystalline materials. They lose their crystallinity. This used to be a big problem. That has been sorted out by cooling the crystals to liquid nitrogen temperature. And if you now collect data at liquid nitrogen temperature, the crystals do not die. So that is what actually how we make it. And then earlier we used to use photographic plate. You know, photographic plate is very slow. It takes time to record a picture. That has been replaced by the so-called image detectors, imaging facilities. It is exactly like your mobile phone. You can photograph anything very fast because those photosensitive material, sensitive material inside respond to even little light very fast. So the same thing has been developed for X-ray diffraction, and we record our X-ray diffraction patterns with these imaging plate. Of course, you know, these are all great developments in material science and physics. But you see, you can discuss, for example, what is the material made of, you know, what are these materials? See, you can see this is some kind of alloy of certain metals. And how does it work? You know, how does exposure to X-rays make it store the information of the photon incident? But I think obviously you cannot learn everything in a lecture. But anyway, these imaging plates actually are much, much faster than photographic plate and much more accurate. Then, of course, I just can summarize now what you do. You have to take any molecule of your choice. Let's say that you have a biological molecule, you isolate it from a living organism and then turn it into crystals. This you can use robots. Then take it to the X-ray lab, shoot it with X-rays, you'll get a picture like this, diffraction picture. And then you have to associate here each of these pictures, not only an intensity, but also a phase. Once you do that, you can easily calculate the electron density map, which actually represents the structure of your protein. And once you know the structure, you can analyze what actually is the meaning. See, I actually said here you have to find the phases of these reflections. It's not enough to find amplitudes. How do you find phases? There are many methods. I am not going to tell you. See, I have come to the end of my time, but I will finish soon. See, there is one multiple isomorphous replacement method developed by Max Perutz. And then it is multiple anomalous dispersion method developed by essentially Professor Ramasheshan at the Indian Institute of Science. But these methods will allow us to determine phases. I have some brief explanation on how these methods work, but I think that that's a little bit detailed. You know, we are running out of time. There's one more method called molecular replacement. So essentially there are three methods: molecular replacement, multiple isomorphous replacement, multiple anomalous dispersion, which allow us to find the phases. Once you have done all that, you can actually calculate the electron density map. One of the important concepts is that the electron density map, you know, how much of X-ray reflections have you recorded? If you have recorded a whole lot of whatever reflection is there, you have recorded. We say you have recorded a high resolution data. But if you have only recorded reflections coming up to some angle from the direct beam, then you have limited resolution. See, at 3 angstrom, the electron density map looks like this. Look at this. This probably represents a circular piece of molecule, but you are not very sure. If you have 2 angstrom resolution, the map looks like this. But you come to 1.5 angstrom resolution, then you see that these are the 6 atoms of a phenyl ring. It is one of the side chains of the proteins. So every atom you will be able to see. You will have atomic resolution. So if you have lower resolution, still you see, if you know what kind of, it's just like if you are given a oval shape and say it's the face of a human, fill up his eyes, ears, nose, you can reasonably fill it up. Like that, if a map like this is given, you can build a model for the protein. If a map like this is given, still you can build a model of the protein because you know how the protein looks. So you can actually construct the protein. And then you can ask, what does this protein mean? What does it do? Of course, you see, in science, you always have to have cross checks. You know, did you do it right? Is your map correct? Is your structure reliable? You have to have error estimate of everything. See, error is very natural. If you don't make any error, you are cooking up your data. See, when we were students, I think in chemistry department, if you had to do titration for your experiment. If you are one drop mistake, they will they will subtract 10 marks. You make, say, 10 drop mistake, then they give you 0. But I think that is a very terrible idea. You have to do the experiment. You have to understand the experiment, perform it right. If you get error, it's okay. You know, unless it is because of carelessness. Anyway, no error means you have cooked up the data. So it's terrible. But anyway, we cannot cook up the data in science. We have many methods of checking. So so-called Ramachandran plot, pendant and the angles which are expected and which are found like that. We have many independent examination to see our protein structure is really reasonable. So you see, this is the summary of X-ray diffraction. It has revolutionized our understanding of biology. See, it took 30 years for Perutz and John Kendrew to determine one protein structure. In the next subsequent 60 years, we have worked out the structure of 180,000 proteins. It's a phenomenal development. These proteins work in various organisms. They can cause disease, they can help us grow. Every function of the cell can now be understood in terms of the molecules of the cell. It has really been very fascinating. You know, the X-ray crystallography took off when I became a graduate student, when I started my research. Today, when I am at the evening of my life, it has really blossomed and matured into a full science. As physics students, you wonder, where do we go next? Of course, the X-ray diffraction itself will continue for quite some time. But now, another technique developed in physics department, you know, electron microscopy. That was, for 50 years, it was dormant. Nobody could use electron microscopy very effectively because electrons will burn everything in their path. But now they have realized how you can protect molecules from burning in a flame of electrons. And that has made electron microscopy extraordinarily powerful. And just over the last 20 years, electron microscopy has become so powerful that it is threatening that it will displace X-ray diffraction from its pedestal and occupy the high seat by itself. This is all what I want to tell. You have listened patiently, and your professors has given me this very rare opportunity to visit. And you know, I would have been very happy to come in person, but because of the COVID, we will have to do it. We had to do it online. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention. I also thank your professors again for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor
Thank you very
Murthy.
much, sir.
Yeah.
Over to
Any
Meera.
questions? Yeah. Shall I? Can we take questions, Professor
Yes,
Murthy?
yes, of course, yes.
I think I'll just make a comment. It's not really a question. It's amazing how you put things in a different perspective on topics that we think we already know. Amazing, Professor Murthy. It was an amazing talk, especially the evolved construction part. I really enjoyed.
I only hope that some of the younger students.
Yeah, now they will have to ask
the
questions.
details.
They will start.
Yeah,
now.
I know that I have nothing new to tell you, professors.
No. Like I told you, even that was very novel for us. Yeah. Students, can you ask questions? You can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself, either of them.
I will again, in the meanwhile, when students get ready to ask questions, may I just make a comment? Hello.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
This is just that when you're showing the waves and in phase and out of phase and things like that, I just got reminded. It's not in a context, but it is just of interest. Professor S. Chandrasekhar has written a book on truth, beauty, and science. I don't remember the name, in which he writes about crests and troughs of a wave. When Rutherford was giving a talk somewhere, people asked him, how is it that Professor Rutherford, that you are always in the crest? Then he had said, who makes the wave? So I remember that, and I want to say, yes. I want to say that your lecture, your talk was so rich in structure and in details and in every aspect of it. So you looked like always in phase and on the crest of the wave that you have created, sir.
Thank you. See, also, I want to give a positive note to students. Yeah. You know, you are all young now. You have a long career ahead of you. And India, after our independence, see, Britishers left us high and dry. You know, India was really backward. We were begging for food from America. You know, 1960s, when I was a young student, every Saturday they used to give upma made of American wheat and some milk powder, milk made of milk powder, American powder. We had a big begging bowl, but we sell now food to other countries. We have come a long way, and even our science and science administration has progressed a great deal. So actually you should make best use of this new atmosphere, and you should do extremely much better than your earlier generation. You know, we are improving that. Take it from me. And also the discrimination in every place where on the basis of whatever group you had, they're also reducing. Our country as a whole is becoming better and better. People are better in general everywhere. You know, there is hardly any quarrel, strife. You know, it's really good. Our society is getting better and better day by day. So you have this opportunity, make best use of it. Don't be pessimistic. You know, sometimes you don't understand, sometimes you understand. But if you make effort, you will understand. And don't have hesitation with your professors. They are all nice people. If you see, our phobia is such that Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru is Brahma. You cannot approach Brahma, you see. It's very difficult. But they are not Brahma, they are like you. They are human beings. You can go ask them anytime, ask your doubt. If you don't understand, they will help you. But important thing is you learn. You see that you develop and you will do very well. There is no doubt about it. I just want to say this because sometimes, you know, particularly people who come from rural places, they may not be able to fluently speak English. They may have some difficulty in interacting with professors, but most of them speak Kannada. You ask questions in Kannada, it doesn't matter really.
Yes.
What matters is how much you learn.
Correct. Yes, sir. Agreed.
Dr. Damle, do you have?
Yeah. Professor Murthy.
Yes.
Thank you very much for very beautiful talk, starting from the fundamentals to the very advanced crystallography. I just have a small question. You said that for X-ray analysis of the structure of the crystals many times are cooled to low temperature in order to reduce the heating of the crystals, right?
Not only that, there's more to it. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in such a case, there could be some structural phase transformation, right, as a function of temperature. And yes, the crystal structure, you get it at low temperature may not be the same as at ambient temperature. There could be some changes in the lattice parameters and things like that.
Yes, yes. Yes, but two answers. You see, first of all, people have determined structure at high room temperature and at cold temperature. See, protein structures are quite robust, so they don't change a whole lot between the two temperatures. So what you determine at cold temperature will only be very marginally different from room temperature structure. This is what majority of the experience is. And the reason we cool crystals is not so much that the crystal gets heated. It will get heated, but that is not the major thing that damages. X-rays are ionizing radiation. So when they go through the crystal, they actually create free radicals. At room temperature, these free radicals move through the crystal lattice. And free radicals, can break covalent bonds. So they actually destroy the crystal. At liquid nitrogen temperature, also free radicals are made. But they are not mobile because it is at 100 degrees Celsius, 100 degree Kelvin. Our experiments are done at 100 degree Kelvin. And it freezes free radicals. Although they are formed, they don't damage. So it's not so much cheating effect. It is to get rid of the bad effect of free radicals.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Murthy.
Yeah. Usually students have hesitation. If somebody asks, there are many people who ask, but the first question is generally the difficult question, ice-breaking.
Yeah.
We'll wait for another minute.
1 second. Ashwini, no. Ashwini, you may ask the question. Yeah. 1 second. Ashwini has a question. Yeah. Ashwini, go ahead.
You have to unmute your phone.
No,
Ashwini,
I have unmuted her. I have unmuted her. I think she's probably having difficulty with her audio.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah, now we can. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Hello, sir. It was a very nice talk. My question is regarding determining the phase angle while actually when we want to know the electron density of a molecule. So you had told us that without the phase information, it is not possible to get the electron density of the molecule. So will you please elaborate? Like I was a bit stuck, like how is that actually physically telling that phase and the numbers together, why will it give the electron density?
Well, you see, electron density, you see, it is like, function and inverse function. See, diffraction is a function of crystal lattice, and crystal lattice is the function of diffraction. And the functional relationship, unfortunately, is a little complex topic, but I am sure you will learn if you are an MSc student. If you are in BSc, you may not learn. They are called Fourier transforms. See, in general, you see y equals x square. If you put x value, you will get y. And if you put y value, of course, you will get two values of x, plus and minus. But if you ignore the minus, these are single valued function. You can do forward function, reverse function. But I will tell you what Fourier transform is in a simple way. See, you students, in this COVID pandemic, want to collect money from students to a poor family. That is a poor family who has a COVID patient. So you go to all your classmates and say, please contribute, please contribute. Everyone contributes. And you have a total lump sum of money. And you go and give it to the person in difficulty. They will get treatment and get well. And another person falls ill. Then you again collect money from everybody. This time they will give some money which is in their pocket, which is not the same as first. And then you go to the next patient and give. Like that, you are 100 students, you have given 100 people money collected from the 100 students. How much every student spent? You have to add the 100 contributions he has made. How much everyone got? you have to add over the 100 people in your class. See, if you want to ask how much one person has spent, you have to ask how much he contributed to 100 patients, and you have to add them. And if you want to know how much a patient got, you have to add over 100 people, what they contributed to that one person. See, this is a much more complex relationship. If you now take the total contribution by all of you and total contribution that each of the patients got, that is a relationship between these two. You see, you can express it. Sum over all the people, how much they contribute to one person goes. And you see, from the other side also, if you ask each person how much you got from such and such a person, if you add them up, you will actually get the total contributed by this. See, this kind of n number of terms defining n number of other terms in a reversible fashion is what Fourier transform consists of. See, the reflections, the crystal structure decides the amplitude and phase of reflections. And amplitude and phase of reflections determine the crystal structure. See, it is, you cannot leave some part of the crystal structure. The entire structure contributes to entire diffraction space. And the entire diffraction space contributes to entire electron density. So you have to use the entire, and you have to find phases, because reflections are associated both with an amplitude and a phase. And I did not cover how to find these phases, because you see, in lecture, you have to leave some, what is very, it takes too long a time and it doesn't make sense. So I just almost like saying, by hook or crook, you find the phases. How exactly it is done, I can tell you if we meet again. There are 3 methods basically, but that was slightly beyond the scope of this lecture. So I did not include it in the lecture. But Max Perutz found one, and one of the methods was developed at IISc Bangalore, the so-called anomalous scattering method. That was developed by Shiv Ramseshan and Venkatesan. And the third method was developed by Michael Rosman in United States. So the 3 methods are very well established. You use any one of these methods to determine the phases. What are these methods? We have not covered. Is that all right?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I
thought
think the
Raghunath had a
auditorium
question.
people cannot ask questions because they are in a group. So it is like we are tying them not to ask questions anyway. So,
But anyway, if you have questions.
May I have a question?
Yeah, please.
Professor Murthy. One thing that mostly bothers students is the necessity of the concept of reciprocal lattice. See, the physical lattice is tangible. They can understand in some way that they represent the locations of atoms in a lattice. But the need for the necessity for even terming the reciprocal lattice.
I will tell you.
Yeah.
It's particularly addressed to students. Actually,
this is basically their question.
You see, actually, reflection that happens is from different faces of the crystal. See, if you take a diamond, it has many, many faces. But you can imagine that you can cut along another face. Well, there is a little bit of explanation necessary. A crystal can be cut along some faces. You cannot cut anyway. See, to cut a crystal, you have to be a crystal expert. Our Rajasthan, there are blue-collar workers who know how to cut diamonds. They learn from their dad, and he learned from his dad. Even today, diamonds are brought to India and cut, and then they are sold in the Middle East because only they have money to buy. We don't have money to buy. But diamond cutting is done in India. You can cut along many faces. So some natural faces are there in the crystal. Let us assume that. Each one of these crystals can diffract X-rays, but the face has to come at a particular angle to the X-ray, which means, considering diffraction, you have to consider rotation of faces and how it relates to X-ray beam. Rotation of faces is a very complex problem. You take a book and rotate about, horizontal or vertical line, it is simple. But think of rotating about some other axis. The way the plane moves becomes very complex. But is there a way you can convert these phases to points? Somehow, a whole phase is represented by a single point. Then can we think of rotation of those points and get the same result as what you will get by rotation of planes? That's what exactly reciprocal lattice achieves. It replaces a plane with a point. We call it Bragg plane in direct space. In reciprocal space, we call it reciprocal lattice point. Both of them are called HKL. You have Bragg plane HKL, you have a reciprocal lattice point HKL. Whatever happens when this HKL plane is rotated, the same thing can be deduced by examining what happens to the HKL point. Rotation of points is very easy. Any axis, any point you rotate, you can immediately figure out what is happening. We know how to work with points. We don't know how to work with planes. If you can, you see, reciprocal lattice converts planes into points. That is why we use reciprocal lattice. If you think about it, you will immediately know what is the elegance of this. It's a very clever construction. What Ewald achieved is extremely clever, that he replaced planes by points, and you get the same result. Whatever complex analysis you have to do with planes, now you have to do it with just points. That is the greatness of P.P. Ewald. If you understand it, of course, you will feel very happy because it's such a fantastic concept, replacing planes with points.
Yeah, absolutely precisely put, Professor Murthy. I think that definitely is the question that many students had, and I think is very relevant to understand the power of X-ray. Yeah, Raghunatha,
yes,
can you?
Yeah. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, because these new developed detectors are very dynamic, let us say we have a particular what do you call X-ray diffraction pattern. Can we do the dynamic studies? Like, for example,
Yes.
let's say change the temperature and then do how does the protein really go in a particular direction? Because it will help in thermodynamics of the proteins. So could you please?
You are thinking about the idea about 20 years too late. If you had thought of it 20 years earlier, you would have got a lot of credit because nobody had thought about it. But for the past 20 years, they have done. See, you need synchrotron radiation. So once synchrotron developed, so it's called dynamic crystallography. It can be done, of course. Not many people are doing, but it can be done. In England, a lot of people have done that. It is possible to do it. But you need a synchrotron radiation. It hasn't been done in India because so far we didn't have synchrotron radiation. But now we have one in Indore. See, just recently commissioned synchrotron in Indore. It's a very weak synchrotron compared to what is available in the West, but we have a synchrotron, which is very nice. It's completely built by Indians,
Meera?
Murthy, Angadi has a question. BA has a question. Yeah. BA, sir?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Tell me.
Yeah, sir. I have seen some nice, slides giving examples of some patterns of Islamic art. So
Yes.
we show different 5-fold and 6-fold symmetry and all.
Yes.
So are these patterns they generated with the knowledge of this crystallography, or how would they actually
No. See, humans are so clever. They were actually made much before crystallography. See, if you go, you just go to Google and put mosques in Iran. See, Indian mosques, for some reason, first of all, Muslims here are very poor. They cannot construct beautiful mosques. They don't have money. But you go to Iran and just say Iran mosques. Google will show you many pictures which are 1,000-year-old. Crystallography is 100-year-old. 1,000-year-old mosques. There are beautiful pictures are there. So intuitively, they have done all these drawings, in the process, they probably have understood the general principles also. See, Iranian carpets are very famous. Carpets in Iran, Iraq, and some of the Middle Eastern countries. Their carpets are extremely popular. On the carpets, they have similar designs. So these are designs which are result of artists' imagination. And that imagination can include mathematics in it without actually knowing the mathematics.
Any other questions? Professor Yarju, you may take over.
So thank you very much, sir, for giving a wonderful lecture. And I think this is the very nice beginning of this series. Jnanamruta Mantana is what we have called. So I thank you very much and thank all the participants who made it interesting for yourself and successful also. So let's thank the speaker again with a virtual clap. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. I will log off. I will log off with your
Yes,
permission.
Yes, sir. Thank you.